All right, Talking TV, episode 61, Ted Lasso. Chris, this is a recommendation from you. You were like, hey, Dom, you got to watch this show. And I'm like, but it's a comedy. I don't like watching comedies. And you were like, you have to watch it. I always watch everything that you tell me to watch. And you're like, you know what? Touche. I'll give you that one. So, kind of before we get into it, people, we're back.
Hey, man, it's kind of like, the whole moral of the show is teamwork, man.
I know. I'm giving you the credit here.
Oh, no, it's just a joke because it's a show about a sports team.
Yeah. Oh,
Anyways.
over my head.
Yeah.
Again, this is why I don't watch comedies. I said this already. This is why I don't watch comedies. Half the jokes on the list are super obvious, go over my head, especially sports comedies, too. So this is a show that was, I guess what you call like kind of one of the flagship shows of Apple TV Plus right now. Because, I mean, it's still so new. It's kind of tricky to determine.
That is a weird one. I did not expect to be asked that question because does Apple TV Plus have, I guess it's like their flagship comedy, but it seems like they don't promote anything in the same way Netflix does.
Yeah, well,
I don't
mean,
really know.
If that's the case, then in that case, they're exactly like Netflix because they don't promote anything. Because again, aside from the morning show, because it won all those and got nominated for all those Emmys, I wasn't aware of like any of Apple shows. I think the only other show of theirs that I was aware of was that Jason Momoa show. I can't remember the name of it off the top. That's the one. That's the one.
Because I have the subscription for a year, so I might as well binge as much as I can. And I actually heard good things. Elliot from Movie Files was talking it up.
Okay.
He's the only guy I've ever seen talk about it at the same time. I do trust his opinion, but I've seen literally no one else talk about it. But see, Tom, before we jump into talking about things, you were kind of talking about our show for a quick second, and I don't cut you off when you were doing
Talking TV podcast. We're back. I think this is our 61st episode. I'm pretty sure.
Well, cheers to that. It's the first time we've given a number.
I think so. Hold on. I got to check because I actually want to start giving numbers because we've done so many of these podcasts. Yeah, this is our 61st episode. That's
awesome. And is that
that's crazy.
61 consecutive weeks, or was there like one or two hiccups, if that, in between?
There was like there was like we recorded 3 episodes in July and then we didn't release them until August, and then we were releasing them then we released the next like batch on one day, and then we didn't start doing it consecutively until El Camino. That was the first consecutive one that we did.
What was that? Episode 7?
Episode 7. Episode 7.
Yeah, good times.
Crazy.
Watching movies in your basement. Hopefully,
no, we'll get back to that soon enough. Don't worry. We got a few more to hit before the year's not over yet. We still got a few more to hit. But people, we're back. It's the main Talking TV podcast in our new live spot on Monday nights. I figured this would just be easier just for editing purposes because we both got a lot on our plates right now.
Totally.
And
let me just say for our audio listeners, if you want to join in on the fun live, we're giving this to you on Wednesday, hoping it's an incentive that you come and hang out with all the other cool things we do here on YouTube. So hit the link in any of our descriptions. It'll be there. We'd love for you to come and join the party.
You get the audio when you get the You get the audio, and in exchange, we give you the video in return because that's the incentive here. We want you to come out and hang out with us on video. And just a little bit of humble bragging before we start off. Chris, I just wanted to ask you that real quick. The idea of humble bragging, I never understood that. It's like if you're going to brag, go all the way. Why be humble about it?
Well, like a humble brag, to me, it's always been a brag that's like, it's cool. Like, dude, like I have... like a level 99 Groudon. I have a level 99 Groudon in Pokemon.
Interesting
Ruby.
Pokemon comparison.
That's like a humble brag. It's cool, but it's not like I just won my local, for example, soccer league tournament, right?
Right.
Like it's not that cool. So that's how I've always felt. It's like a way to kind of brag about something that's like kind of hard to brag about. But what's your take?
Well, the impetus that I was going for there is that our community top 10, which is still our highest viewed video on the channel, surpassed 1,000 views this past week, and it is still climbing. I think it's almost to 1,100 already somehow.
See, that's a humble brag because I'm assuming you're grateful for that.
Very, very grateful.
Same here. So
okay, now I understand. I think I get the purpose, but that's not what we're here to talk about tonight. Again, I'm going to hand this mostly over to Chris this episode because this really is in his wheelhouse, and he was recommending it. He is the TV nerd after all. It's funny because I'm not going to lie and say this was a very strong year for television, but this was certainly a very diverse year for television. I've certainly seen a lot of shows that I did not expect at all that I would watch in any other year. This is certainly a year full of shows that I didn't think I was going to like that have certainly proved to be very interesting. There's still a lot of shows that I still have yet to tackle. And so now we're doing this show, Ted Lasso, the story of Jason Sudeikis playing an American coach who goes over to coach an English football team. And at first I said, oh no, this is a comedy. I'm usually not that big when it comes into like brand new comedies. They're usually kind of tough for me to get into. I usually, unless they're like really having me laugh hard in the first episode, I'm usually like, oh, great. So I'm probably not going to watch this. But weirdly enough, this is one of those situations where I wasn't necessarily laughing super hard throughout each episode, but that also may not have been the point of the show overall.
100%. No, it's totally not. This show, I think, reaps the benefits of this new kind of type of show that I really saw emerge for the first time in like the late 2000s, early teens, called a dramedy, where really there's going to be some laughs, but for every second you're laughing, there's 10 times more interesting character moments and character growth and character development. And it's not as much so like I'm watching Seinfeld right now, right? And that's so much the old school format of zinger after zinger. The situations are all just one big joke, and it's just getting to the punchline. This comes with the more modern, sense of television. Like we've spoken a lot on this show, how TV's really come a long way in the past 20 years, especially. But since its, dawn, since its inception, and this show, I think, is the fruit of that labor. It is the benefactor of countless television shows giving you little character moments. Like, for example, with Seinfeld, it's like, oh, okay, so Elaine and Jerry get back together, but that takes a little while, and it's just the slightest bit of character development, story beat that keeps you watching from week to week, but it's still the old school antiquated formula of get to the punchline. I love that. Seinfeld's incredible. It's going to go down as one of my favorite shows. But now we get like the new kind of comedy that sort of the early 2000s really helped bring with like the shows we always talk about, right? Like Lost, Breaking Bad, even like Game of Thrones coming in and sort of being like a great way to push this thing forward. And so the thing about it is it comes into its own because of the shows before it. And so this isn't your mom's comedy. This isn't your father's comedy. It's got more heart to it. It's got more punch and more kick in some really intense and sad ways. And it's kind of my wheelhouse of comedy, where each episode leads into the next one, and it's not just sort of your procedural start and stops. And so if you like where TVs went, then you're kind of already in a good spot coming into this show. But if you're kind of like, well, I don't really want to think too hard about my comedies, maybe Ted Lasso is a little more than you're bargaining out for. So I think that's why it's always going to be a little more niche. Stranger Boy in the chat real quick saying, Ayo, what up, Stranger Boy? Oh, shit, we just hit 120, Dom. Congrats,
we did.
My friend.
I keep telling you, we get one new subscriber with every live video. So that's awesome. Does us pretty well.
So yeah, Dom, with me kind of painting how I see it and how I see the inception and really how I define this show, what's your take on all that?
Yeah, like I said, this is more so your wheelhouse because you're more the TV guy and also more the comedy guy. I'll admit most of the shows that I watch are dramas. I'm usually not that big a comedy fan, with the odd exception being Community, because that's just perfect. And yeah, I don't know what it is about it. I've often stated that kind of the reason why I found a lot of the animated adult comedies funny, but the reason why I couldn't kind of keep going with them as far as longevity's sake, and usually why I never gravitated towards them, is because they provided for a lot of repetitive nature, kind of similar to like a lot of procedurals. The reason why they seem to go on forever is because it usually seems to stick the characters in scenarios that make you think they're growing, but they actually don't. And case in point, one of my favorite comedies, How I Met Your Mother, seemed to put its characters through the same set of circumstances over and over and over and over again. But this show, I will start off by saying this about this show, from having literally just finished the last episode. Like before we got on this episode, I pulled you with The Last Airbender, and I have to say the immediate thing that I noticed is that it's been the latest in a long line of comedies that have been attempting to, let's say, add a little bit of story with those characters. So rather than just sticking the characters in that same set of familiar circumstances with those same set of tropes and having them go through the motions over and over again, they do have that, but they've got Apple behind them, so they've got a lot more money. They've got a much larger kind of theatrical look to them. They've got, the characters are, I'm not going to say they feel more so real, but the circumstances, at least most of them, still do feel majorly real. And it's dealing with some pretty interesting themes. It's dealing with them in a very lighthearted way, obviously, and probably not in a way that like needs to go super dark, because there are a lot of just areas with the subject matter involved in the show that could go super dark. But overall, I think it's a fun, light watch. And I definitely think that out of all the watches that I've had so far this year, it's definitely the lightest and the most fun, which is, again, something I can't say about a lot of shows that we're watching right now. And as far as that being kind of subject matter that people need right now, it's good. I heavily recommend it.
Cool. Yeah, no, I feel you on that. And let me ask you this, because I know you don't watch a particularly large amount of comedies, but sort of, you brought up How I Met Your Mother, and I think without shows like How I Met Your Mother, we wouldn't be in the position to have shows like Ted Lasso being greenlit and sort of getting off the air, because How I Met Your Mother sort of had its traditional roots in regards to that it very much borrowed from its predecessor Friends, and it had its procedural start and stop episodes, but there was a lot more through lines, a lot more continuing plots than you had really seen in sitcoms prior to that. Like, you think only a few years beforehand you had King of Queens and Everybody Loves Raymond running the airwaves, and those were pretty much just like the same formula that we got from Seinfeld and shows even earlier than that. So to me, it's like comedy's still evolving on the small screen, and I think Ted Lasso is one of those shows that I think is just trying to find its place in the new medium of comedy. Because like you said, right, you weren't laughing too much throughout it, but it's still it's still a fun watch. And I think that's because there's comedy within these moments and these characters that they create. Ted Lasso is kind of a comedic guy, whether he realizes it or not. But really, it's about if you don't laugh at what this guy's going through, it's actually pretty sad. And so that's where I think the comedy comes in.
Exactly. And I've kind of made my thoughts on that specific type of comedy clear. I'm usually not, of all the comedy that is out there, that's usually the comedy that I'm not the biggest fan of, taking the main guy who's usually just kind of a good-natured guy and just shitting on him unnecessarily. Now, that's not what this show does. I've seen a lot of just movies and shows in general that are much, much worse examples of that just egregiously shit on a central character for just no apparent reason. This show absolutely was not that. And obviously, it's the fact that Jason Sudeikis is the one running the show here. Like, the show completely revolves around him. He's one of the co-creators. I very, very much enjoy how kind of he has this can-do attitude that never seems to give up despite the circumstances around him. And he kind of forces the circumstances to go along with him. It's an interesting story area, especially one given that it could have fallen into a lot of predictable circumstances so much easier.
Sure. Yeah,
and also, given the other factor that I would actually consider this more of like a sports show than a comedy show more than anything else. And I think it's kind of like the big misnomer around this. I think that's part of like sort of what comedy, similar to what we were talking about earlier this year, like what comedy has to do in order to keep going forward as far as like being, kind of hopping genres around, doing a couple different things, obviously with them just recently doing What We Do in the Shadows and that being like kind of like a horror piece, and I'm trying to think of other comedies that I've watched this year. I like the Little Dicky show, Dave, which is very clearly another musical biopic. Comedies, I find the really, really standout ones, the ones that get nominated for Emmys usually are the ones that like have to do a lot of genre hopping. And what I find interesting about this one is, among all other things, it does have kind of this undeniable charm to it. That's the one thing I will say. This is a very, very charming show above all else.
So I actually want to kind of ask you about this because, I've heard many arguments where the show does kind of take the main character and abuse him and sort of
it does. Absolutely.
Fun at him for being this like lovable guy who's just too positive for his own good. So when you say that you think it doesn't really sort of, crap all over him, like you said, not that I feel that way, but like I think a lot of people and the reviews I've read and sort of some of the commentary I've seen people give on this show from like others in our community and sort of some of like, the creators that we aspire to be like, they all kind of feel that way. So I kind of want to like unpack why we have this different take on it. And since you brought it up, why don't you kind of like get your thoughts on it first? Then I can kind of go on that.
Well, I mean, just because we have just such different thoughts on comedy, I feel like, than most other people, I've been just of the same, like, I don't know what it is, like just my relationship with comedy in general, in the sense of I love stand-up, but shows to me, I don't know, I think it's just the places where I find humor. I find humor in things that aren't directly trying to be funny. I think that when something is intentionally trying to be funny, that's usually kind of really distracting to me overall. It's why like a lot of the typical yucks, I'm like, okay, unless they have just like a really zany, crazy edge, like I'm usually not going to go for it. Like I think it's part of the reason why I still to this day like find mostly nothing funny about The American Office. But the thing about this show is that there were a lot of things that kind of twisted that traditional formula and made it different. So like for perfect example, kind of taking an American and sticking him in Britain, but almost kind of making the British setting like a faux American setting, for lack of a better word, only because I've been to London. I mean, don't get me wrong. I know they get crazy for their sports. Absolutely. But there were certain influences there where I'm like, okay, I'd like to know if this was like kind of an American joke versus a British joke, You know, just kind of it had that kind of that dry overall sense, but it also had just that straightforward nature. Like they were just completely liberal with just calling it like all sorts of manners. And there are points where, really strangely enough, I couldn't tell if the show was like trying to like, okay, now you should laugh at this guy. And they're like, oh no, but seriously, just feel bad for this guy because he's got a rough life and he's still got this can-do attitude that's going to take them all the way through to the finals. And the show definitely does have like an interesting pace to it. Like once you get into the rhythm of watching the episodes, it's definitely like, okay, I do want to keep watching. Like I was never bored watching the show, unlike another big comedy this year with freaking Space Force. But I think the most interesting thing to me about this is kind of just like the Apple effect of it and what this is going to do, because the fact of the matter is Apple TV Plus is still relatively new in the streaming wars. They have a lot of shows, most of which have not been heard of. Their only big show really so far has been the morning show, which, let's face it, due to the amount of talent that was involved there, that show was going to get recognized regardless. And I'm just going to be interested to see the long-term effects, specifically because this show in particular seems to be like their secret success that nobody's been talking about. It got renewed for a second season immediately after the season was done. It's already been renewed for a third season.
Yeah,
so like clearly I did. I was the one who told you about it. Clearly, this show has got some legs in order to last itself for the long while. The question is, though, will Apple continue to buy to the success, or will this fall victim to many other shows that have come before it, as far as falling victim to the eponymous canceling nature of the streaming services?
Yeah, so that is to be seen. Apple TV Plus is a relatively new service. I think its oldest show is about to start its third season. So we'll see what happens. You know, it seems like, though, this really does feel, from the interviews I've watched and what I've read, like Jason Sudeikis' image come to life. It really feels like the vision that he saw, because I don't know if you know this, but back in, I think, 2011, Jason Sudeikis, who's a huge football fan to begin with, he would go over there and sort of make cameos when he was like on a movie cycle promoting whatever film he was in at the time, and he'd play this character, Ted Lasso, for like halftime or whatever they do over there. They don't have halftime in soccer, but like, you know what I mean, when they cut to commercial and stuff like that, he would play this character, this American football coach commenting on soccer. So he's had this thought for a long time, and it seems like Apple so far is being the good producer, unlike Netflix. But I don't really want to take it too much there, but you do raise a good point with that, just because I think it's too early to tell. So for us to beat that horse right now just seems pointless. Besides, horses are beautiful animals. Anyways, what I would say is the thing about this show that really stands out to me is you don't really know what you're getting. But if you stick with it, and I will give it to you that it was a little rough at first, because I think new streaming service, I think independently created but working with a big company, the vision wasn't really packaged and sold in a way where I think this should be a much bigger hit than it is. So I was a little confused going into this. I thought it was going to be zinger after zinger. You know, I had my knowledge of Jason Sudeikis going into this. I like him. That's a big part of why I watched the show about a sport that I really don't care about. It's just not my sport. I'm more of the American football guy. And so it's just like, once you get past the first 3 episodes and you kind of see the web they're weaving, it's a completely different show than I think most people think going into it. But I actually think it's a better show. I think that these characters really get to know each other in these, what was it, 8 episodes? 10 episodes? 10
episodes, yeah.
Yeah, 10 episodes that are a half hour tops, better than, I mean, hey, we're covering The Mandalorian week to week right now. And it's just like the growth that they have in this show is, that's what it is for me. There's funny moments, but it's a show about the characters and the drama, honestly. So as weird as it is that this is a comedy series, I'm not coming there for the laughs each week, because like I said, they're few and far between. I'm coming for the characters.
Yeah, so you brought up a good point as far as this being another character-driven show. I mean, I would hope that's what it is, because that's what most good TV should be. But what's it called? The other thing that I noticed is that oh my God, everything is distracting me tonight just with all this stuff.
You noticed that?
Unfortunately.
I was saying, I was just trying to pick you back up where you left off. You said that, you know, because I was talking about coming for the characters each week and not the laughs. Yeah, you were saying that you noticed something.
Yeah, so so I guess like if you want to just jump ship, let's talk about the characters, because this is it's an interesting cast to say the least. It's a cast that could have easily fallen into type category, but they actually did a surprisingly good job of fleshing each one of them out. Obviously, Jason Sudeikis being the lead character, I think he's got like his eponymous charming personality. I'm just glad that Sudeikis finally has like a big driving vehicle, something that I feel like he's been lacking for a long time, that he's always been like right on the precipice of. He's had a lot of good roles in the last couple of years. Obviously, a very notable part in the Horrible Bosses movie. And I think it was also actually a standout in Colossal, that independent movie that came out with Anne Hathaway 3 years ago. But he's great in this. But the rest of the cast too, I particularly like Hannah Waddingham as Rebecca, the owner, who kind of starts off as like a typical character, like a Major League-esque character. There were a lot of influences and homages to different sports movies that I noticed, like particularly with Major League. And that character, I thought it was going to go in one direction, where I even called you after this first episode and I'm like, oh no, this is where this character's going. But she didn't end up going, well, I mean, she did, but she ended up, of course, having the liar revealed moment at the end where she admits to Ted, hey, I didn't actually do this. And then you get into the what's it called? The other major characters that you pretty much cover are her kind of right-hand man, Higgins, who they always make like kind of like a little joke how he's got like a ton of family members. Jamie, two of the major soccer players or football players in this case being Jamie and Roy. Jamie, the young hotshot, who's like the hot new like superstar on the team, and Roy, who's kind of the aging guy who's on his way out, but he's been there forever. And kind of their dynamic is pretty interesting. I love how Roy's like kind of just always perpetually angry.
Yeah,
and what's it called? You've also got Sudeikis as right-hand man, both in this show and in the original sketches that you were mentioning before. Coach Beard, his name is literally Beard, portrayed by Brendan Hunt. Then you've got Nathan, kind of the picked on one, the team's water boy or kit man in this case. And then, of course, the only other big star that I recognized in this show, that was Juno Temple as Keely, who's a model and Jamie's girlfriend, who eventually ends up dating Roy. And it was an interesting little batch of characters. I liked it. I liked how kind of spread out and diverse it was. And it was interesting how I felt like it was another show where finally we got a bunch of diverse characters that like actually have stuff to do. And like, they're not like, they're filling out certain type roles, but they also have like a little bit of like diversity as far as what they offer, as far as breaking away from those character types.
So, yeah, exactly. And you know what they did really well to me was they really made these characters feel like they needed each other. If it's a team, right? A team is a very dependent thing. One can't function without the other, and the other, and the other, all being at 110%. And a team isn't just the people on the field. It isn't just the coaches. It's the organization, like they showed with the general manager. They showed with Higgins, right? Even his small role, when he was having an off day, it affects the whole team. They really kind of help paint that ecosystem. And I thought that was really done well, because you kind of said this felt more like a sports show. See, I
did.
Because
much
it takes
more so.
place in a locker room majority of the time, to me it still didn't feel like a sports show. It felt like a character drama set to the backdrop of sports, but the sports really, the sport mindset, the mentality of being a team player, supporting each other through thick or thin, that was, I thought, a really beautiful kind of undertone to exemplify what I love about this kind of modern dramedy comedy. So it's just kind of like, it was weird because it was such a present part in this show, the sports, and they even had a really cool, I thought they actually, side note, really did a good job when we actually saw the one soccer game, because I mean, that was a big budget moment for them. I was thinking to myself, okay, they're showing us almost a full game here. It was actually interesting, and it didn't just feel like we were watching sports for like 10, 15 minutes. It actually had some cool character moments in it, but I don't know, I just think they did a really good job using the setting to enrich the stories the characters were trying to tell and the things they were going through, but it never really felt like it was off-putting because it was a sports show. But did you feel different about that?
I wouldn't say it was off-putting. I would definitely just kind of say it like kind of interfered with the sense of like, I'm like, okay, like I was able to watch the first episode and be like, okay, this is not going to be like a comedy as far as like the yuck yucks. Like they're going to have like comedic moments and like certain comedic archetypes, but they're going to break away from them really quick and it's going to be like about the drama. And at the end of the day, like I was really much more so like kind of cheering for the Richmond team in their favor. I'm like, okay, yeah, this is like hitting me way more like the sports movie feels than the comedy feels. And now the sports movie genre is definitely another genre where I'm like, okay, unless it's a very particular type of movie, it's not like one of my go-to genres. Like I don't go out of my way to watch sports movies, but this one kind of hit me a little bit in the feels. It was a it was a little bit interesting in that sense, kind of like how you saw the team camaraderie, and also just like kind of like the sleekness of the show, like kind of the obviously the Apple TV money just makes it feel like you're watching like an actual sports game. Which I'm just gonna say, there's also a big reason why I don't watch sports in real life. Just as far as that goes, unfortunately, I kind of think they're boring, and I've kind of never understood the appeal for them. It's why I watch movies. I'm like, okay, if I watch something on the screen, I want to watch like a story here. And sports don't necessarily give me a story, but I mean, more so than anything else, I kind of wanted to dive into like kind of your brain on this and kind of pick apart your brain, because you were the one who was so heavily recommending this to me overall. Like you were saying, like of all the shows, you got to get this one, you got to hit this one. And I guess just my question for you is like, what was it about this show that like kind of stood out to you so much?
Yeah, this show has a charm unlike one that I haven't seen in a long time. There's a criminally underrated Netflix original series called Flaked, which is a passion project from Will Arnett, which is marketed as a comedy, but it's kind of like an Everything Must Go Will Ferrell type movie where it's really about how, being a comedy is sort of the thing. Being a comedian and being known for being a comedian is kind of the thing that, in a sense, Will Ferrell feels like is taking away from his identity. Will Arnett feels like is taking away from his identity, and Sudeikis hasn't come right out and said that. But I always think it's really cool when comedians are A, helming a creative project, and B, sort of kind of like flipping the script and like being like, okay, you came here for one thing, and it's not quite what you expected it to be. We know that. We're sorry about that, because that's how I felt about the first 2 to 3 episodes. But don't you still want to stick around? And that was the charm in it, where it's like, I feel lied to, and I don't like that, especially when it comes to like marketing. I'm a big analytics guy, and I think it's just wrong to mislead people to get them to click on your material. But god damn it, I couldn't click off this though once I started watching it, because it's just such a well-written show. It really knows its characters, and it knows what they want, and it knows, at least for me personally, my taste, how to get the feeling out of the viewer. And so that's what it was. It just resonated on so many simple levels, but levels that I think are often overlooked.
Interesting. Yeah, I definitely think that for me, this is a show that would not have watched it if you hadn't told me about it, recommended it to me. I really, really enjoyed kind of, I really enjoyed kind of, again, like the simple nature charm of it. I like the mixing of the cultures overall, the American mixed with the British humor. I liked, click off that for a second. I liked how kind of effervescent it was. I kind of liked how effortless it made it seem. The problem is that, and I hate to do this, but this is a background noise show for me. I'm going to be completely honest. It was a show that I was watching, and I'm like, okay, there's a lot of sports lingo, and I'm sure there's a lot of stuff in here that a lot of people are going to enjoy. It's a charming, effervescent show, and I'm not going to remember this show in like 10 minutes. I'm sorry. I hate to be that guy, but I'm like, okay, Sudeikis is great. Everybody in the show is great. It's super charming, but I can predict the beats like from a mile away. Kind of, and the unfortunate thing is that it kind of ended up, unfortunately, taking away from the tension for me. I think the most interesting thing to me was the last episode when they were actually on the final game. And the whole thing about it was that I think the biggest surprise was that they said they needed to tie, and then they were like, yay, we got it. And then they lost because Jamie was put on the opposite team and ended up scoring the last point. And they were like, oh. And then afterwards, Sudeikis is like, okay, we're going to come back next season. And then it ends and he just spits off water as the latest in a long-running series of gags. And I'm like, cool. That's kind of like how this ends.
Well, see, I feel like they got all of the predictability out of the way. Now we kind of get to see a completely different show, I feel, coming forward. The tables have turned. The whole plot line of him not having anyone believe in him and him sort of being the ploy for the general manager to get back at her husband who used to own the team, they could have carried that through and really kept that going, and it would have gotten older. I think this show, to me, and I've watched a lot more comedies than you, I suppose. Maybe this is where I've seen shows fall into a trap where they sort of keep their original feel and they get afraid to navigate away from it. To me, I think now we really get to explore not only uncharted territory, but like all of these characters I feel should be feeling so much more empowered going into the next segment of the show. So there might be a huge tonal shift, which still I think for comedies is going to be a bit different. But this is why I like this show. I feel like it's going to take and do risks that other shows haven't taken. And I think that's partly because, big company budget, leaving the show in the creator's hands, which is awesome. I'm all for that. But to me, I think it's going to be refreshing going forward. So what I see coming down the pipeline for the show is so much stronger than, for example, you brought up Space Force, right? To me, all that seems like is, hey, we're just going to keep it super safe. Apparently the show was a hit. Netflix doesn't release numbers. People at least talked about it for a month. So we're going to give you more of the same thing. And we're not going to get that from Ted Lasso because it's a complete 180 where we met these characters and where we left off with them. And I haven't really seen that done too much in these types of comedies. Like even shows that I love, like Kim's Convenience. It's like, okay, cool. By season 2, you know the formula, you know what you're getting, you love it, you're into the characters, but they're never fully changing the script on you like this. So I was impressed by that. I was inspired by that.
Yeah, and I'll give you this, like, as far as like the characters feeling empowered despite coming off a horrific loss at the end of that last season, I definitely think was a big improvement. Obviously, there was a lot of motivation that was done to the characters on the show, kind of Roy coming to terms with the fact that he is kind of in a weird way that a much less damaged version of the Dennis Quaid character from Any Given Sunday, which, oh man, for anybody who's seen that movie, that guy gets fucking demolished in the opening game in that movie. But yeah, he kind of comes to terms with the fact that, like, wow, he literally just gave his all to like that one last play, kicking the ball away from Jamie. And then he kind of has to come to terms with the fact that he's coming out. Obviously, Keely coming to terms with a new relationship with him. Hannah finally coming to terms with the fact that, hey, this team can actually do well outside of my husband. And I can actually, have some pride in this thing, even though I originally wanted to just torpedo this in order to get back at him, which the husband, by the way, played by Anthony Head from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, giving an extra level of slime right here. I think he's only outdone by Hugh Grant in Paddington 2. But yeah, I definitely get like a sense of like, like a lot of the characters, like particularly the Nathan character, like Hayes is a big motivation where it's like he finally kind of works his way up from like the kit man to like Ted taking a lot of confidence in him, and he finally gets promoted to coach at the end. Like that's what I mean. Like Ted's enthusiasm and Ted's just overall good nature is infectious, to say the least. Like it's kind of impossible to watch the show and not be infected by his endearing charm overall. And that's what I mean. That's why I'm the most proud of Sudeikis for completely finally managing to get like a role like this to just play to his absolute strengths. That's kind of what comedy stars do overall. It's what happens to them usually after they get pretty big. And this is kind of been long overdue for him. But I think that, to me, is going to be the part that I remember and enjoy the most about the show. The rest of it, as far as kind of just watching it for like the character antics, they were fun, they were cutesy, but at the same time, it was like there was like anything like groundbreaking here that I'm saying. Like when they're at like when they're at the auction just for fun, and that just leads to like more romantic tension between Keely and Jamie, and then how it ends with them like riding in the car just drinking champagne. I'm like, okay. I think the most compelling episode probably so far was the one with Ted where his wife comes over. The problem with that being that like his wife is just like, oh, so we're falling into that trap of she wants to divorce him for just no reason other than they're just not getting along. And I'm like, okay, I get it, but I think there's a reason why that's the biggest reason why I don't gravitate towards these type of shows, because it feels like kind of just real life events just happening. And even though they're prevalent, and even though these things happen in real life, I'm kind of like, okay, but I need to see that like really impact and move the story forward. And I'm just not getting that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that this is where I just think I disagree with you. I think that they really did a good job of explaining sort of Ted's conflict with his wife and how it pained him to leave home and to leave his son. I mean, for any family man, not that I am one, but I mean, when I go on a vacation and have to leave my family or go on tour, right? Back when I used to tour all the time, it would kill me to leave. I mean, I was going to have a good time and pursue a dream and a passion, but it was never an easy decision to make, being away for 3-4 months at a time on the road. So I can kind of relate to him in regards to that. And I actually think they did a really good job of sort of letting you feel how Ted Lasso felt and putting you behind the hood of Ted Lasso. But, I don't think I come to comedies for one specific reason. But there is one specific reason that I stick around to comedies. And it's when above all else, the characters just work and they feel real and they feel organic and they make mistakes and they're human. I think that's something that, thankfully, this, like we always talk about, more recent years of TV have given us, is more human characters in regards to the dramas of Breaking Bad and, shows sort of like Sons of Anarchy and all these shows that were really huge and popular, where it's like these characters are flawed. These characters aren't perfect. They're not super Hollywoodized people that are shining and pristine, and their makeup's not always right, because life's not always right. And so this show, to me, felt very in touch. It felt very in touch with people's day-to-day struggles, and I can respect that and I can appreciate that, because I think all too often we get this faux sense of reality from Hollywood and from movies and TV, and especially when we're talking about characters and people that are rooted in reality. It's a shame when that happens, and I enjoy when we get sort of like the oddball sleeper pick. But again, I do understand how that might not be your cup of tea, or where someone like you who has your type of taste. It's not for everyone. This is certainly a niche topic, and that's kind of why I wanted you to watch it, because I was curious to see like what your take on it would be.
Yeah, definitely. And the other thing that I'll add to that as well is that this kind of also mixed in, again, kind of something interesting that I really haven't seen before, which is the thing that I wanted to talk about the most, which is the American and British kind of sense of humor coming together and kind of like the mixing and meshing, because we've seen like translation from across the pond to another. Like we've seen numerous British shows that were fantastic and then they get translated to America, and sometimes they work, sometimes you get a Shameless, and sometimes you get an American Skins, which, oh boy, there's a reason why that shit only lasted 2 seasons. But this is interesting because this is a little bit of a mix. It's a sense of like, I'm trying to think, I think Sudeikis created this with some British people. He created, so him and Brendan Hunt, who star in the show, also created this with Joe Kelly and Bill Lawrence. Bill Lawrence created was the creator of Scrubs, so that explains a lot just as far as like kind of like the good nature. I don't know. Did you ever watch Scrubs? Were you a Scrubs guy?
It's not my cup of tea.
Okay,
I have no ill will towards it.
I knew people who liked it, and I knew people who didn't. And my whole thing was that I saw it, I'm like, oh, it's just Zach Braff and Donald Faison like singing and being goofy every episode, and it's in a hospital. Cool. It's that kind of a setup. But I don't know, like the thing that was, there were certain scenes where it was kind of off-putting, where I'm like, this is a scene that feels like out of an American comedy. Like this doesn't feel like it has like the super dry wit of the British. And I don't know, like the weird thing is that for a comedy, I'm like, I feel like I'm supposed to be laughing a lot more, and I get it. It's not the type of a show where everything is going to be insane and zany, but it's also like, okay, but you don't need everything to be super straight-laced and down to earth, It's kind of like, I don't exactly want to compare it to something like Freaks and Geeks, because the thing about Freaks and Geeks that made that so special is that had the coming of age element to it. So that would like kind of allow like the more awkward moments to seem really awkward and in the moment, because it benefited the source material, And even though it wasn't necessarily kind of the funniest show, the humor kind of came out of the situations. This was a sense where it felt like they were trying to get humor out of the situations, but it almost felt forced. It wasn't forced in the sense of like, okay, this is like clearly written for the joke, but it's also like, okay, it's just a little bit overacting. And it's like getting a little cartoonish how he's always angry. And it's getting a little cartoonish, just all like kind of like the nonsense and like all of Sudeikis' antics. That part was getting like a little bit Michael Scottish for me. And that's where like the Office moments are starting to creep in. And I was like, oh, okay. I certainly respect it. I respect it for its niche nature. And who knows, when and if I decide to watch season 2, it might be a little bit interesting and kind of a different experience for me. But as far as things go, again, there's a reason why I don't gravitate towards shows like these.
Gotcha. No, fair enough, man. To each his own. I was curious to see your brain about it. It's just one of those things where I'm glad you gave it a chance. And real quick, before we sort of duck out of here, I'm curious, like, define the yuck yucks. You've sort of said that a lot, but I want people to have context in regards to that.
Well, yeah, just like the typical shticky comedy situations that you see in a lot of sitcoms. Sometimes they can be like really subtle, sometimes they can be like really obvious and gaudy, and other times they're kind of right in the middle. Again, like the reason why I think Community is my absolute favorite comedy of all time is because the jokes are so well written, and even though they're overly bombastic when they come in, just the way that they're cleverly set up for it just makes me laugh every single time, but that's the thing about the show. This was a show that like wasn't writing itself deliberately for jokes. This was a show that was saying, hey, we're about a soccer team that sucks, and you could laugh at how they suck, or you could like cheer for the fact that they're slightly gonna get better, because again, it's like, I think it's a reason too why I don't gravitate necessarily towards movies like this, because I'm like, okay, if I'm just by nature, if I'm watching a movie about an underdog, I want to watch the underdog succeed. I don't necessarily want to see like, oh, could he succeed or could he fail? And like when, again, this wasn't the worst example, but like when the whole world is against him, it's like, really? It's like, well, what's the point of me watching then if it's just like the whole world is just going to shit on him every time? And then like obviously it becomes more like good natured and more like in like a cheerful, bashful way. It's like, oh, hey, you shithead, good job. It's like, oh, thanks. And he just kind of rolls with it. And I'm like, oh, okay. So like if he doesn't care about it, then why do I care? It's like you're supposed to put yourself in the main character's shoes. So
gotcha. Yeah, and I felt that was very easy to do in this series.
I'm hoping I'm sounding cohesive just overall.
No, I think you are. I just think it's okay. We're on different sides of the coin. I was going to say, I think it's so funny how your worldview sort of can inform the way you perceive different genres or mediums of entertainment. Like, for example, for me, when I walk into a studio, I want it to be clean at first, but I want it to very quickly get messy. I don't want to have to abide by rules, and I don't want to have to abide by restrictions. And I really feel like that's what the writers did in this show. Like I said, they introduced something at first that was quite different than we thought we were going to get. And so they said, hey, this isn't the cleanest thing. This is messy. This is sticky. But if you can stick with it and stick with us, I think it's going to be a ride worth taking. And I like that. You know, that's my kind of thing. I'm into, like, for example, this show Flake that I always talk about. I know it's not the greatest show of all time. I know it's not a cinematic crowning achievement. But what I also know about it is it was so unapologetically true to itself. It was not afraid to roll up its sleeves and get dirty and work for what it produced. And shows like this, they do that for me. They inspire me as an artist, and they speak to my worldview, and they speak to how I perceive things and see things. And so I think that comedy obviously is super subjective, as we've spoken about. Go listen to our State of Comedy episode or whatever we aptly titled it, but it's up there. You'll find it. And then that's just kind of like, this is cool. I enjoyed sort of talking about this with you, because it's so funny to see how, for example, and it's funny, I think you don't think I like Community. It's in my top 10 shows of all time.
No, I never said that you didn't like it. I know that you like it. I just know that you don't like it as much as other comedies.
Yeah, and it's so funny to see how you like it over other comedies. And I think
Community is better than like most other comedies out there.
While we have so many similarities, I think it's like with comedy and horror, there are like two genres. That
if Shocktober proved anything about my horror tastes.
And they're just so subjective, and unapologetically they will curtail you to one side of the aisle or the other.
Yeah, and it's tricky because we don't always talk about Star Wars and Marvel on this channel. We do actually talk about other things, especially coming up soon, and it's just really interesting. But I'm like, I actually have to like watch other movies. It's so weird because I've been like stuck in friggin' like nerddom for so long. I'm like, oh wait, that's right, there are actually other movies to talk about. Like just this past weekend there were like 2 movies that came out where I'm like, oh wow, I actually have to watch those. I actually have to make time to watch those. But hey, one of them at the very least, it looks like will be a comedy, and it looks like it's going to be funny, because people, if you don't think that I'm not going to watch The Fat Man with Mel Gibson, you're kidding yourselves, because that movie that looks great. See, that's the type of comedy that I'm into, like kind of the stupid, ridiculous comedy that's absolutely nonsensical and knows it's nonsensical. Something like this. It's fun. It's nichey. It's got its audience. It's definitely got that little irk that makes it just a little bit different. But it's not something that I'd actively seek out, and it's certainly not something that I have to say I'm going to be like, remember, like this is not a show that I watch and think, oh yes, this is going to be in my top 10 favorite lists of best list of the year, but that's okay. That's just me. There are certain shows that are kind of just like the regular average shows that I like that, like that delightful little show On My Block on Netflix that I like, but even those characters like kind of zany and over the top and very like 90s sitcom-esque. Like I said, it has to go along with what lines up with my character, and sometimes I love British TV. Like I love Skins. Skins is amazing,
and I also agree with you on that.
But then sometimes you get a show where it's like, oh, okay, we're kind of just doing our thing, and we're kind of just like that, and I'm like, okay, I used to be able to tolerate that stuff. Now it takes a little bit more for me to enjoy it. So overall, I would recommend Ted Lasso if you're feeling kind of down and you need just something really simple and really easy to get into that is going to pick up your spirits. But before we kind of get out of here, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about just Apple TV Plus and kind of what it spells out, because we've talked about like kind of the other streaming services and kind of like how they're really starting to find their groove both within these dark pandemic times, but also compared to some of the other streaming services. Netflix is still going full steam ahead. Disney Plus is getting right up there. Amazon is prepping for like a big Oscar season. The Peacock is still relatively new. Like there's still like really nothing to talk about as far as that goes, but
there's Tubi, whatever that is.
Whatever that is. Quibi is already filing bankruptcy, which again, just like the idea behind that just seems stupid. But I mean, obviously most recently with the idea that Apple was almost on the verge of purchasing the latest James Bond movie, which was tremendous news in and of itself. And the fact, and that would upset Vince, and the fact that like, it seems like they've got all this content that seems almost inconsequential, but they've got all this money to pull in, and even more so than Amazon, they seem to be like, okay, our content is completely secondary to us. We're only doing this because we can. Like, I just wanted to know what your stance on that and how that kind of bodes for like what their place in the entertainment of the future is going to be.
Yeah, so we'll certainly elaborate on this as Dom. I don't know if you started the morning show yet. We're going to be covering that this month at some point on the channel. And it almost feels like you may have started it because what you just said in regards to the budget and the grandiose scale of
I already
Apple
know that
TV.
That show's like stacked as far as the budget
Oh, you haven't
goes.
seen it yet, though?
No, not yet. I haven't started it yet.
Well, you nailed the aesthetic of it in that sentence, which I think was obviously kind of a given, but just for someone who's seen it, they double down on it to say the least.
Yeah, the amount of stars in that show.
It's, to me, so far everything I've watched on it, I've really enjoyed. So far everything I've watched on it has been really niche, But also, so far, everything I've watched on it, it seems that it's the creator's vision first, with a boatload of money to back it up and really bring it to life. They seem like the dream studio. They really seem like everything people wanted Netflix originals to be, but then, of course, they guilt-trip the duffers, or not guilt-trip, sort of, I guess, not a bribe, but when you offer someone that much money to take your limited series and expand it, like, 4, 5, 6 seasons, you're not going to say no. You know, they don't have that sort of manipulation, that network classic Hollywood manipulation. For example, we were just hanging out the other day. We were talking about how with The Godfather, they told Coppola, we're making this third film with or without you. So either you want to be on it or you're not going to be on it. But
like you're either in or you're out.
Exactly.
They literally mafia checked him.
They mafia him, but they literally said, look, we're the studio. We have the right and the power to do this, so we're doing it either way. It doesn't feel like you're getting that with Apple TV Plus.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting, to say the least, because, again, there's still no, Chris, I actually have not seen Defending Jacob yet, but that was another one that, like, looked interesting that I remotely remember. It's weird. It's just because of everything that I have seen from Apple TV so far, it's nothing necessarily that jumps out to me. Like, I still have yet, just like, again, I would never watch this show unless you would, like, push me through it and recommended it to me. Like, I have yet to see anything from them that really, like, screams like it's going to make an impact. Because the whole thing about the morning show, like I said before, is that was a show that was so star-studded and, like, so prevalent with what it was about that it didn't matter who picked that up. You know, like, it was going to be picked up. It was going to be huge and win a bunch of Emmys regardless. But because Apple picked it up, I'm like, yeah, there's a reason why I didn't hear about this show until the Emmys. And it won. It was famously Billy Crudup won supporting actor in a drama for that show. And so I just think it's going to be interesting to kind of, like, see their progress going forward, especially given that they seem to have all this money, but they have the no advertising, but they put up an episode a week, and they've got, like, they've been drawing, like, a lot of creators to them, like, already, like, supposedly, like, Sofia Coppola's already put her new movie on there. Supposedly they're going to be funding Martin Scorsese's next movie, Killers of the Flower Moon. A couple of other tourists that are signing on to that. They're kind of, like, trying to do, like, a mix and mesh of everything. Like, they're pulling from Netflix's model, they're pulling from Amazon's model, they're pulling from Hulu's model. They've got everything. So I'm kind of waiting to see, like, when they get, like, a big name property where I'm going to be like, okay, now Apple's entered the game. And I haven't seen that from them yet. You know, like, Morning Show's the only one, but Morning Show is kind of the equivalent of, like, their Handmaid's Tale. You know, it's big, it's got a lot of stars, it's got a lot of, you know, acclaim to it. It's going to win a lot of Emmys going forward, you know, but I still have yet to see anything from them that's, like, really, like, screams like, yes, we're on the map now.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think one of the things, however, they have going for them that isn't just the boatloads of cash that we all know are just sitting there waiting to be used is the fact that they're, like, one of the later players to enter the streaming game. You know, they kind of get to look at what Netflix did that worked, what Hulu did that worked, what HBO has done that's worked, and also look at what they've done that hasn't worked. And I think that's huge. And so I think that's why, yes, we haven't had a breakout hit yet, but I also think that's why all of their shows are, for the most part, if they've been watched, see, that's the thing. If people have actually watched them, they've been very well received, though. I have not heard a bad thing about an Apple TV Plus show. I've only heard good things, but I haven't heard the good things from that many different people.
Right. It's still tricky because they're still relatively new. So it's hard to determine just what the stance is with the overall with the overall reviews versus what the numbers are. Because, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think they've released their numbers, same as every other streaming service. So that's just another part of the game that we're just going to be completely not privy to. But again, it's going to be interesting both with the rest of this year and obviously going into next year and the next couple of years to see what the overall streaming game is going to be. I think that they were trying to fund, like, a big name project like Amazon's Lord of the Rings project, but I can't remember what it was off the top of my head. Again, the most interesting piece of news concerning them was the fact that they were almost going to buy the latest James Bond movie, which, trust me, we'll have an episode coming up later on that is going to cover that because, oh boy, there was a lot to talk about as far as that goes. But Chris, unless you have anything else to say about this, you want to just do star ratings?
Yeah, let's do star ratings, man.
All right. Ted Lasso, again, niche show, my first official Apple TV Plus show that I finished. It was good. It was cutesy, good cast, good story, really good, like, kind of feel good show to just kind of turn on and use as background noise. But unfortunately, that's all it was. It was another background noise show for me. It's not anything to be spectacular. I enjoyed my watch, but I can't say it's anything that, like, really blew me away. So unfortunately, this is only a 3.5 out of 5 for me.
Fair enough. I see that. And that's actually a higher rating than I thought you were going to give it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate
fair,
you.
I think.
Listen, man, one of my favorite things about doing this show is, like, taking ourselves out of our elements and being open to try new things.
This is a different episode for me. I was very out of my element.
Yeah, but look, I love what you brought to the table, man. You make me think about things in a different way, which is why I think we always just got to be open to any suggestion that fits the bill, right? We can't be covering Criterion movies all the time. We've clearly established ourselves as not that, although there are some classics that we might
I was
cover.
about to say we better
And,
freaking cover some Criterion movies. I'm gonna be really pissed. I'm gonna make a petition next year to like do like a classic movie podcast at least once a month. So if you don't think I'm not putting that forward at the next Criterion at the next production meeting, you're kidding yourself.
That's a good idea. I mean, I enjoy listening to
Good
old
classic.
40s, 50s
Dude,
music right now. So
trust me, if you think that I'm not going to get you into some Francois Truffaut, some Ingmar Bergman, some Kurosawa, oh man, we got a laundry list of filmmakers that you've never heard of to get into. Like, so I'm talking some old school film school stuff.
I'm excited. That sounds good to me. Yeah, man. So like I enjoy these types of episodes because I think they're not so much for the show itself. People kind of already know where we stand coming into it, but I think it's our back and forth where I really felt like I learned something today.
It's the interesting takes that we have overall. Yeah. So, Chris, what are your final thoughts and ratings of Ted Lasso? And also, do you think the show will make your top 10 favorite TV shows of 2020?
Yeah, I think we'll see what show beats it at the number 1 seed. It is a 5 out of 5 because I went out and bought 3 different screenwriting books after watching the show because I've been trying to find a show that makes me want to create. I've been in a little bit of an artistic rut all year, and I saw this show and I was like, you just got to stick through it. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, and real creating is alive and well. The studios and corporatism hasn't killed passion yet, and that's what I got from the show. Is like just an overload of passion and compelling storytelling. So it's a 5 out of 5, and it's my top show of the year so far.
Interesting. Definitely interesting. Again, that's going to be an interesting list, and I'm really, really glad that we're kind of... Actually, I don't know. I kind of am debating whether I want to do films or TV first this year. Because I wanted to do films last year because I thought there were... I mean, both films and TV were both like equally kind of creative and interesting as far as last year's list goes. But it's going to be interesting to see where that goes this year. But so people, thanks once again for tuning into another episode of Talking TV with our discussion on Ted Lasso. Hopefully YouTube's bug didn't completely screw us this time around, because the last couple of videos that we tried to do got completely like, come on, YouTube, get your shit together. What are you doing?
Insult the gods, Dom.
I'm doing it. I'm going to be that guy. I don't care. They got to get their shit together, dude. There are people whose livelihoods depend on this stuff. This is important stuff. We are the Talking TV podcast, movie nerd, TV nerd. You can find us on here at this channel, Talking TV. If you click the subscribe button and the like button and the little bell next to it, that way you can get notified every time we put up new comments. People, we had our first video just hit 1,000 views, which is incredibly humbling and pretty awesome and pretty spectacular for a video that I just kind of put out there into the zeitgeist as a joke. And
you did a better job than I think you gave yourself credit for.
Not to humble brag, but the video is a lot better than I give myself credit for. I'm like, all right, this is a pretty consistent top 10. A few of the technicals could have been better, but overall this is still pretty good. And but that's not the only piece of content that we have for you guys. We have so much content that we put out. We put out content Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Fridays, we've got our Mandalorian watch along. We just did episode 3 this past week, chapter 11, The Heiress, which was a bomb-ass episode, and it also made for a bomb-ass recap episode, which was so much fun. We've got another Star Wars related top 10 list. That's right, people. I'm finally bringing the top 10 list back 2 days from now on Wednesday. That will be my top 10 favorite Star Wars moments. It was very, very tricky to pick from. It's very, very tricky to pick from.
I can't wait to see that.
But I've got a lot of interesting choices there. So I'm hoping you guys will happily tune into that and see if some of your favorite Star Wars moments made it onto that list. And then also tune in on Friday for the review and recap of episode 4 of this season of The Mandalorian. Guys,
what time are we doing that, by the way?
8 o'clock, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This coming Friday.
Write that down. Hang on.
Every Friday night. And people, we've only got a month and a half left of the year, and we're almost at the end of our season 2. Like that's insane. That's crazy to think about. And we just got another subscriber tonight. We've been booking up subscribers like crazy. We've been booking up followers like crazy, and it's all thanks to you guys. You guys have been pretty awesome when it comes to this, just as far as like showing the support overall, continuing to support us young creators in these dark times, and allowing us to continue to do what we love, and for me personally, giving me a reason to get out of bed in the morning. So it's just it's a very, very humbling experience. So Chris, unless you have anything to leave the people with,
just thank you, and everything Dom said, it means a lot.
Follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram at Talking TV Podcast. This is a little bit of a more low-key, chill episode for us tonight, but we need those every once in a while. So once again, thank you for tuning in, and as always, watch more fucking movies. And in this case, TV. We out.